So I'm here in Quincy, Massachusetts at the site of the John Adams birthplace. Yes, right behind me. That is where our second president, John Adams, was born. One of the most important founding fathers, certainly one of the leaders of making sure that our independence happened at the Continental Congress. Anyway, so it's cool. You can go inside the house there. Um, this is all part of the National Park Service, and it's part of the Adams Historical Park. But this property is about a mile and a half away from the Stone House, Peacefield, where the Adamses lived later. So anyway, this house right here, like I said, this is where John Adams was born. And then just right next door, they built another house, which is where John Quincy Adams, his son, was born. And that's where John and Abigail lived. And that's also where he had his law practice. And there's like a special door that he built onto the side of the house that's was for his clients to come in. And you can see the study and stuff there. It's really pretty awesome. Right now, we're in the Dorchester neighborhood of Boston, and you can see Boston proper. We're just over this way, overlooking downtown over that way. Of course, this Dorchester area is significant, especially back in 1776, because it was here on the 6th anniversary of the Boston Massacre that George Washington placed the guns that Henry Knox had gotten from Fort Ticonderoga, set them up at Dorchester Heights, aimed them at the British ships in the harbor. This was, of course, during the siege of Boston, after Lexington and Concord, after the Battle of Bunker Hill, and soon after George Washington, of course, had taken over as the commander, and the siege of Boston had been dragging on, and he put those guns from Fort Ticonderoga up here the Dorchester area, Dorchester Heights. And this is what forces, of course, the British to leave Boston. But there's one other extremely important thing that we are seeing here in the Dorchester area, and that, of course, is the JFK Library. This is one of the several libraries in honor of former presidents. Every modern president, going all the way back to Herbert Hoover, has had a library made in the years after he has left office, other than FDR, who was the first one. He was technically still in office, and when he started the whole trend of these presidential libraries. And they're not just a place, a library per se. It's more of a museum and a place for archives. And in fact, it's run by the National Archives and Records Administration here in the United States. The JFK Library, by the way, was amazing. We just finished up in there. You've got so many fascinating exhibits and things to see in there. Definitely worth your time. Some of my favorite things were about the 1960 presidential election with Richard Nixon. There was a lot on the campaign and how it was so different and how TV had become such a big part of it. Some of those were the most interesting, I thought, parts of it. There were some great things about civil rights, about visits to Latin America. Of course, there's a chunk of the Berlin Wall there, as there should be. Ich bin ein Berliner. And there's, of course, some really interesting stuff from the space race that you can see there. Kennedy's presidency was, of course, short, but extremely eventful. Such a pivotal time in our history when you think about the civil rights movement and you think about the Cold War. It's all kind of happening at once in those few short years that Kennedy was in office. So when you come to Boston, take some time to come over here to Dorchester and check out the JFK Library. So I'm here at the old stone house at Peacefield in Quincy, Massachusetts. This is part of the Adams Historic Park. And man, what an amazing visit this was today. It really exceeded my expectations, and my expectations were high, mind you. I'm a huge fan of John Adams. I think he's such an underrated figure in American history. And this house was the home of 4 generations of Adams. Before it was turned over to the government to be taken care of, to be kept up. And I think that's really what stands out so much about this particular house compared to some other similar types of historic sites that we've been to. most of the time when you go to one of these old homes, a lot of times the home has been rebuilt. The foundation was there and it's been rebuilt to be like it was, which is amazing, but it's not the same thing as being the same home, obviously. And a lot of times the furniture inside, of course, they don't know exactly what furniture was in the home, and they don't know, and so they will try to find similar furniture from the era or rebuild furniture. Sometimes trucks go by also when you're trying to film. Bus, whatever that was, it was loud. Train, something. Anyway, but what's so different about here that just struck me is the things you're seeing in there are the real deal. The desk that John Adams was sitting at when he wrote a letter to Thomas Jefferson that rekindled their friendship late in life. In that same room, of course, where he suffered a stroke on July 3rd, 1826, and passed away the next day on the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson, of course, did as well, which is one of the craziest coincidences in all of American history. But this was just amazing. There was a library that was built by Charles Francis Adams, and this was to try to protect the books from a potential fire inside the house. And you have this unbelievably massive collection of books that belonged to the Adams family, and they're there. They're not replacement books. They're not similar books. They're not other old books. They're the real deal. And I think that that's one of the things that is so amazing about this particular place. One of the cool things too is you can see the red chair that John Adams was famously posing in when the last painting ever made of him was done very late in life. He's famously sitting in this red chair. Well, that red chair is in the house. So anyway, the gardens are beautiful and big. Like it's pretty cool that here in the middle of this busy town, just outside of Boston proper, you have this beautiful park, and you've got a rose bush that belonged to Abigail Adams that's still going strong. You've got a tree that was planted by John Quincy Adams. It really is impressive, and definitely worth a visit. We were supposed to come here in 2019, and we were on a cruise that was going to come to Boston, and this was the place in Boston that we most wanted to see. We had it all set up, and then the cruise had some bad weather, and we didn't get to come and have a port in Boston. So it's been 5 years, but definitely glad that we made it here finally. So I'm here at the First Parish Church in Quincy, Massachusetts, or as the locals would say, Quincy, Massachusetts. And this church was built in 1828, so that's 2 years after John Adams died. There was an earlier church that was located adjacent to it that was the one that, well, a couple of earlier versions, but the one that was adjacent to is the one that John Adams would have attended. But of course, his son, John Quincy Adams, would have attended this church, and John Adams helped contribute the stone that ended up building this church. This is totally worth your time if you're here in Boston. This is located just outside of what is technically Boston, I guess you could say. And here's why. Here's why it's worth it. You give a small donation, you get to go down in the crypt. They take you down there, and you find the graves in a crypt of John Adams, his wife Abigail, and of course John Quincy Adams and his wife as well, down in the crypt. It's a place where the only place you'll ever be able to see two graves of two presidents in one room, and it's quite a profound experience down there. It's a small room with these massive tombs, and it really was more than I was expecting. I didn't realize, I didn't know exactly what the grave was. I kind of just assumed it was in a graveyard or something, and there is a graveyard here as well. It's really pretty amazing. An old graveyard that started back in the 1600s that you can see, that's by the new city hall, which is still in the 1800s, right? But anyway, you have this amazing cemetery that has some other major figures from the time period, including Josiah Quincy, who was Abigail Adams' cousin, and who was co-counsel with John Adams during the trial of the Boston Massacre soldiers. You have Abigail Adams, Nabby, the daughter of John Adams, is buried in this cemetery. John Hancock's father, John Hancock, is also buried in this cemetery, as well as a number of other interesting figures. It's just kind of cool to see these old gravestones and to realize the people that walked this cemetery all those years ago.